using Mission Book tonight. We're using the ministry on ministry training. And so if you know which one to get on, okay? And we're going to be on this one for a couple of hours, for a couple of lectures. And I need to catch up, so I'm taking this opportunity God's given us to do that. Now, we see here, and we're on number 15, page 65, under one, the couple. We're on the fifth paragraph. Okay. He said, couples who are Christians. Those who are Christians should have a basic standard to see if marriage is God's will. Now, it's it. Are both people saved? Number one, they both need to be saved. Okay? Because a lost person who's never been saved before, they are full of all kinds of problems and sin, because they're lost. Their father's the devil. And so, that's very important. Are both saved? Next question is, are both people spiritually minded? They need to be spiritually minded. That's very important if they're going to get a marriage and plan on living together the rest of their life. Because we are human beings, and all human beings are problems. We are problems. I mean, that's who we are. We're fallible. You need to know that and such. And we have tempers and all, and on it goes. So we need to be spiritual. So you need to be spiritual. She needs to be spiritual, and all. Both you need to be spiritual, and all. Now here's what we had a great pastor in San Diego. He had a large church, and he pastored for about 50 years, and he learned something. He learned that if a couple get married and serve God together, that's spiritual. To be in all the services when they have the Wednesday night, Sunday night, Sunday morning, and the revivals when they come. He said the divorce rate is only 1 out of 100. Now that's pretty good. I mean, that's real good. And that's what you want, right? I mean, if you're going to get married to somebody and invest your life in them, you ought to go ahead and make sure that it's going to work. And so if they're both spiritual, that's very important. They need to be spiritual minded. Okay? In other words, God's first in their life and their mate second. He said, are both people servants in a sound Baptist church? Remember this, God's will is never contradiction to God's word at all. And so he uses the word Baptist here. They're both servants in the Baptist churches. We know that the average Baptist church is sound in the doctrines of the Bible. But he says, remember this, God's will is never a contradiction to God's word. So God has a will for us. Now, what you need to know about God's will, there's two things as a believer you can be sure of. You're either living in God's perfect will, and that's what we want to do, or you're living in his permissive will. In other words, you're going to do what you want to, and God can't stop you. He just permits you to do it. It's his permissive will. He just, God says, well, do it. They have to learn the hard way. They won't learn. Let them learn the hard way. And so they're in God's permissive will. They're not in God's perfect will. Now, I would rather be in the battlefield, in the middle of a battle, and thousands of soldiers dying all around me, in God's perfect will, than to be sitting in the church house in God's perfect will. You need to know that. Because if we're in God's perfect will, he's watching over us. And so remember that when you were in the military, I know you were on a ship where it's dangerous. The ship can go down and you go with it. Okay. And now he says here the next thing, number 2, is the counseling that deals with the wedding. He said, premarital counseling is a preventative counseling. And that's important. Now, he gives us a little example here on the right of your page of your lesson. Let's take a look at that. It makes sense to me is the title. Let's look at that. If you were planning a 2-week trip through the Rocky Mountains, you would be asking hundreds of questions. What's the best way to get there? What will the weather be like? What clothes should I take? How much will it cost? Where will I stay? How many places will I have to have time to visit along the way? When you are contemplating a trip that is to last the rest of your life, how foolish not to ask just as many or more questions before starting out. Before heading off on a vacation, you will want to ask some questions about your car to make sure it's a good repair. Do the tires have plenty of tread? Are they bald and about to blow out? Has the engine been serviced regularly, or does it take a quart of oil a week to keep it running? Asking questions about your car doesn't mean it's ready for the junk heap. It just means you want to be in the best condition possible for the dangerous roads ahead. And asking questions about your relationships doesn't indicate you're giving up on it. It just means you want to make sure it's not going to break down when you have to go through some tough times. And so that's a good illustration, okay? So that's the idea of counseling, to get them ready for the long trip ahead, because it's going to be a long one, okay? And if they're not ready for it, it can be a sad trip. You know, I mean, how'd you like to have been saving for years, and you're going to go on this trip now, and you're halfway there, and the motor blows up in your car. That would be horrible.
Somehow the trip just got longer.
Yeah. You think about it. But here's the thing: so you want to make sure when you get married that it's not going to blow up on you. You want to keep going. It's going to be fun, and you're going to enjoy each other and love each other for the rest of your life. Okay?
Are we talking about the car or the wife?
Huh?
He's really
the
digging
marriage.
this hole.
Huh? So if you marry a girl or a guy it's God's will, then God's going to help work it out. But counseling is important. It's not counseling; it's training. It's marriage training is what it is. You train them to be married. Sometimes people hear the word counseling, it scares them to death. They don't want no counsel from anybody. They know everything. But let's see what that says here. Premarital counseling is preventative counseling. That's what it is. Instead, it is approaching problems before they are problems, so they might not become problems. It is doing a little work before the marriage begins, instead of doing a lot of work after the marriage, is to keep things from falling apart. That's what it's all about. So get them ready, because what we try to do is train them with the problems to come, because we know what they are. We've been doing this all our life, as preachers have. And so we want to prepare them for the problems to come, because they're going to come. And so they know what to do then when that problem comes, you see.
Where are they going to come?
I mean, it's like that. If you're going to drive a car, and you know that you're going to have a flat one of these days. I mean, that's just it. I mean, I bought some brand new tires, and on the way home, I had a flat. Can you believe that? They were brand new, had real thick rubber. They had a flat. So I went and got it fixed, had a screw in it. But you see, I knew what to do if I had a flat. I had a jack.
Fix it.
Yeah, and a lug wrench. And I fixed it. I changed the tires. I was ready. And so we need to be prepared for when these problems come, because they are going to come, I promise. There's no perfect marriage. There's no perfect person. Get that down. There's only one perfect, and we killed him. Okay?
Amen.
So understand that. Now, look what it says here. He says, it is doing a little work before the marriage begins, instead of doing a lot of work after the marriage to keep things from falling apart. So when you're trained to take care of the problem when it comes, it's real simple, because you knew it was going to come. I mean, you know you're going to get a flat. I mean, if you don't put oil in your car, you know it's going to run out, and the motor's going to blow up. Okay? And so he said it's a good practice, the last paragraph, not to marry anyone who will not submit to premarital counseling. So if they don't want to submit to premarital counseling, then you don't want to marry them, because they don't want to get ready for things ahead. They want to just live for right now. You can't live that way.
I would think it would be a better practice just to not get married.
Yeah, maybe so. But anyway, I mean, we need to be prepared when winter comes. I mean, you got to have a nice heavy coat when winter comes. We know it's going to come. So let's get prepared for it. And so we need to be prepared in a marriage, because the problems are going to come. He said, they will seek counseling after they are, notice the next, it festers, and then one day she throws you out.
Murder's illegal.
Huh?
And murder's illegal.
Yeah. And then everybody says, well, it's not my fault. That's not true. It's both people's fault when a problem comes, usually. Usually both. Okay? And also the danger of divorce. Now notice this, 2 out of 4 marriages end in divorce before the 10th anniversary. Even if the percentage were as low as 10% marriage failure, that is 10% too much. Okay, that's too much. Because there's the thing, when we take a vow, it's until death do us part. That's what the vow is. But sometimes it can't be. I mean, sometimes we might mean it, but the other person might not. You know. He said mission counseling can follow the suggested procedure. And so, and every one of you probably will do that and work in marriage counseling to help people. Session 1, the first session you have is the general counseling of the scripture view of marriage. And so you go through that with them. Start with the pattern of marriage, Genesis 2:18-22. And Adam was alone. He was lonely. Not good. God said it's not good for a man to be alone. Not good for women to be alone. And so God made a wife, and she already had a man waiting for her. And so, but God did that, because it's not. And God knows what He's doing. And I found that since I've gotten older now, I'm young still, but since I've got a little older and the hair turned gray, that being married is a wonderful thing. But sometimes you can get sick, and your good wife will go bring you a glass of water, and she'll bring you the Tylenol and those things. And all of that is important, okay? And to help each other. And so you can get a lot more done with 2 than with 1. Okay, he says here, monogamous. One man, one woman, one lifetime. Huh?
Monogamous.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. Well, let's had a hard time with that one. Well, we all have a hard time with some words. Heterosexual, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And that's with it. Okay? And that's a terrible sin for some man to want to marry a man. For some woman to marry one woman. Or some woman that want to become a man and go get an operation. Or some man to want to become a woman and get an operation to make him a woman. That's all terrible, horrible, wicked sin in the eyes of God. Okay? He said here, and I'm looking at this now, he said the permanence of marriage, Matthew 19:6, what God had joined together. Okay, and so again, if you pray for the right one, and God tells you can marry her, and God tells her she can marry you, and then God was involved. And so God is the one who said y'all can get married, that y'all are meant to be married to each other. And so now, because of that then, you can be sure that what God had joined together, not what you joined, but what God did, okay? What God had joined together. And so that's very important. That's where it's at. The purpose of marriage, completion. It takes 2 to make 1. And so that's the reason that even Jesus said, when you're married, you become one. You find that in Mark 10. You become one when you're married and all. And so that's very interesting. And then also companionship. It's not good to be alone. You need companionship. Children. Sex is God's idea of procreation. And it's that way in all the animal world and the bugs and the butterflies and everything. God has a plan, procreation, to multiply. And then the problems of marriage. Here's where they're at.
Here we go.
And all. They're not mature. The maturity. And you need to be mature when you're making this decision to live with someone the rest of your life. Immaturity. Income. Do you have enough to get married? Many years ago, and this 50 years, I was up at Bible college just back in 53 years ago. This professor I had was a very brilliant man. He said, now, before any of you get married, you men need to have $50,000 in the bank before you get married. Now that's probably $100,000 a day.
They give you a good reason to run.
$100,000 $10,000 in the bank, he said. That's what he said. And I got to thinking, well, he's right. It costs a lot of money to be married.
I could have bought a boat for $10,000.
And so income. Can you afford it? Are you live under a tree or under a bridge. Okay.
In a boat.
Yeah, I had a couple here once that got married. I mean, they were older and all. And we were talking one day, he said, we got married, we lived under a bridge. Yeah, that's what he said. We lived under a bridge. I'm sure glad a flood didn't come. But he said, until we could get ahead and all. And another couple, I mean, they said they lived in a tent up out of town by the creek bottom on the hill. That's what it was, by the creek. They lived in a tent, you know. But I mean, marriage is serious, and you ought to have enough money. You ought to have a home or a house paid for, or maybe you're paying on it, or a good apartment or something. You're going to get married. That income is important. And what about the indifference? That's another problem in marriage. And so here's somebody who marries somebody who they just speak Russian, and then the other one just speaks English. There can sure be a lot of indifference there, trying to figure out what they're trying to say, you know. And so that could be a problem too. And so indifference, it can come many different ways, you know. And then another one is in-laws, okay, and all. And that's what in-laws and income are the two biggest problems usually. In-laws, and that could really be a problem. Because here's one thing I've noticed through the years, sometimes daddy will give her away, but he didn't really give her away. He just marched up to the altar and handed her over to the young man. Then him or his wife calls her every day and tells her what to do. And the guy ain't even married to her. He's married to her daddy or mama, so they tell her what to do every day. And that can really be a problem, you know, in-laws. So the idea is, if you're an in-law and your kids get married, let them work out their own problems. If they come to you, ask for some wisdom or something, give it to them. But don't be calling them every day and telling them what to do, or every week, or even every month. You don't do that. Okay? And then the interest. Do they have the same interests? Things they like to do together. That's very important too. You know, the interest in the same infidelity. And that means that they should go ahead and be honest with everything they do. And then he said the pledge of marriage. He said, then you take the pledge. That's what the pledge means. I will admit my faults. Okay. So
what was infidelity? What does that mean?
It means that you don't go out and spend all your money gambling and lying and cheating. That's what that means. Infidelity is another word for that is an infidel, if you know what that is. So you can figure that out. Okay, being immoral.
Exactly.
Okay. The pledge of marriage. Okay, let's take a look at this one. He said you got to admit your faults. You know, when you get married, you got to admit your faults. You got to know you have a fault. Okay, we all have faults because we're human beings. And so what you do is, if that fault's really bothering her, you have to go ahead and work on it. That's the thing, or him. If it bothers him, you work on it, okay? And all. That's the fault. And he said, I will accept my companion's weakness. And so your companion's got to have weakness, and you got to accept that. Okay, you must understand that, because we all have weaknesses. Okay, even a new car will have weaknesses. You know, how many of you ever heard of the Yugo? Have you ever heard of the Yugo?
That was a rolling weakness.
Everything on it was weak. Yeah. Well, the way, if you can find one, they're worth a lot of money now. Because there's so few left, they went to the junkyard so fast. You know, and you never forget them. I borrowed one, so somebody wanted me to move his car, so I did. I put it in gear and pulled it back, and it broke off, the gear thing did. And I looked at it, it was made out of plastic. So anyway, I know those Yugos. Yeah. It's called Yugo because it made Yugoslavia. Okay. And then so you got to expect your mate to have weakness.
Oh, the Yugo, because the car don't.
But,
you do.
Yeah. And you don't want to major on your mate's weakness. You want to major on her strengths. That's what you do. Okay.
Yes.
And another thing he said, I will appreciate my companion's strong points. So there you go, you see. Some have weakness, some have strong points. Okay. I will avoid a bitter attitude. And so that's something that can come up, marriage a bitter attitude. And try to avoid that. Make sure it's not you who gets bitter. That's be wise, okay? He said, I will address and answer my companion lovingly. And so that's how you do it. You don't scream and holler at him. You do it in a loving way, in a kind way. And a soft word turns away wrath. That's what the Bible says. So a soft word, that's important. Because everybody's going to go ahead and the attitude's going to jump out. I will address and answer my companion lovingly. I will appeal to my companion wisely. That's very important. So in other words, what I'm appealing to is that it's a wise move. I will ask for God's help. And that's really important because you have to, sometimes you're going to have His help to be a good wife or a good husband. I will accelerate my efforts to improve my marriage. And so you all should be working to improve your marriage. Work on it. We got to work on it. And all. So these are the pledges in marriage you need to take a look at and take and share with each other, and all in counseling sessions. You need to sit down, think about this. So you got to understand when you're going to counsel them, they're all there in love and everything's perfect. Oh, we're going to get together. Never be a bad word. It ain't that way. You know.
Then they wake up.
I'll never spit on her, you know. And so I'll never hit him with a rolling pin. But you know, sometimes he needs it. But nevertheless, there's some things you need to know as we counsel these couples that are getting married. And by the way, every couple that gets married needs some counseling, some premarital counseling. Even if they're 80 years old and getting married, they need some premarital counseling. That's very important because a lot of times they live through divorce, and they live through that, so they need to make sure they don't make that mistake again. Okay, and because sometimes it was their fault in the divorce. Really, it takes two to tango, but it usually takes two. Somebody won't forgive is usually the problem. The key to that is forgive. If you forgive everything they do, that'll work. But sometimes, you know, it can go on and on and on. And you got to do something. And that's just the way it is. We have one example in the Bible, of a couple were married, and the woman run off, and it was bad. But the Bible teaches us that you do it right way when you get married. Make sure they're spiritual and everything else. If they'll do it the right way, it ought to work.
Did she run off with the auto mechanic?
What was that?
The milkman.
Did she run off with the auto mechanic?
Yeah. So
The shepherd.
now here's some more things you got to deal with them about, because this is important. The relational. Have you had any arguments since your engagement? You got to talk about that. Have y'all had any arguments? What are you arguing about? Usually the same thing. So that has to be addressed. That thing they argue about, okay? Maybe she don't like it that he owns a shotgun and all, because a lot of people are afraid of a rifle. So the best thing to do is to get rid of the shotgun, you know, and get a bow and arrow or something. But anyway, if that is a problem, it needs to be addressed. And what happened? What caused the arguments? Did one of you apologize and admit fault? And so there it is. I mean, the person who really was doing the fault is apologizing and say, honey, I'm sorry to have that shotgun, and I'm going to go down to the hawk shop and sell it, and I'll take that money and I'll buy you a pair of earrings. You see, that's what you do. You know, make that work. Could be a golf club.
Really?
Could be a golf club. You know, golf club. Maybe he's always playing golf, and that could be it. You know, so, honey, I'm going to sell those back. What could be fishing? Yeah. And say, honey, I'm not going to go fishing anymore unless you go with me. And you know, things like that. But anyway, if you have a husband that's fishing all the time, you better thank God. We need to eat fish 3 times a week, in case you're not aware of that, for health reasons. We eat fish 3 times a week. He said here, have you ever walked out after an argument? No, that's what little children do. They walk out. You know, I mean, I don't know if you've been in a game before, and all of the one of the kids said, "I'm taking my ball and going home," and so there you go. You know, they run away. It wasn't going their way, so they just left. You don't do that. The kids do that. We're an adult. We're adults. We can make that work. Okay. Have you ever walked out after an argument? Who was the worst? Who has the worst temper, and who usually wins the argument? So there you go. You see it. That caused great problems, and that'll lead to a divorce. That person all the time wins the argument. You know, the best thing is don't argue. You know, I mean, I learned this. I'll tell you the truth. If somebody tells me that this is round, if they're that dumb, I'll just agree with them. Yeah, that way you won't have an argument. If you say, "Oh no, it ain't. It's more square than round."
What do you tell
They say,
yourself?
"No, it's a round." They say, "No, it's more square than round. It has 4 corners," and it just gets worse. That ain't worth it. Life is too short to argue. Okay, and so anyway, try to keep from arguing. Sometimes we can fall into it because we're human and fallible. But anyway, somebody's going to win that argument.
So do you say if you're that dumb, it's okay,
Yeah.
it's round? Do you say that out loud when you
No.
Here's another one under G. Are you jealous of your finance? There's no place in marriage for
Of your
jealousy.
fiance, you mean?
You know, really. Some people are very jealous. Okay, they're very jealous and all. And I was dating a young lady once. I knew her a long time. She was very jealous. I probably wouldn't even married her because I was lost then, didn't know better. But she was so jealous, so she married a man who was in the FBI. He made a serious mistake. He taught her how to shoot. Well, you don't teach a jealous person how to shoot. So she got word he was going out with women. So she held that gun on him one night and tried to get him to confess and apologize and all that. And he wouldn't do it. He grabbed her his gun. She killed him. Yeah. Spent 10 years in prison. You know. So you see, it's not worth it. And be careful with your jealousy. If you're jealous, take it to God. Say, "God, I have a problem with jealousy. Take it from me. He'll help you overcome it." That's stupid. Jealousy is the most stupid thing. The Bible says it's like a red hot coal. Jealousy is. Yeah. I mean, have you ever held a red hot coal in your hand?
No.
Huh? You don't want to. I promise you.
It burns.
He said, "What does he or she do most to provoke your jealousy?" Now, these are questions you need to ask. Remember, you're doing counseling. So you ask them, "So what is it that causes you to be jealous?" And she might say, "I looked at another woman." Or he might say, "She danced with another guy." You see, and jealousy is a horrible thing. Okay? Number I. Do you consider your parents to have a successful marriage? So that's something to look at. How have they made it? What have they been doing? How have they overcome their problems? What have you seen them do when they get in a anger or something pops up? And what have you seen them do? He said, what contributed to their success or failure? So that's a good one. You know, you're doing this, you're counseling them, you're trying to help them. Look at your parents. What did they do? You know, look under K. That can you accept each other as you are? And so that's another one. Can you accept each other as you are? Are you willing to do that? You know, now I had a cousin. His name was Bittlinger, and he was engaged to a girl, and she had a car wreck, and she was paralyzed from her neck down. And he married her. He had to push her out in a wheelchair, but he accepted her for what she was. Okay, and all, yeah.
I have a nephew that married a girl that doesn't have any legs.
Really? No legs, huh? Yeah, it means he had to go get everything. Yeah, he had to probably cook and everything, and wash the clothes. And
No, they had their houses built to where they had their houses built.
maybe she had wooden legs. It could get around, you know.
She had short legs, so she could still go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she had to use her arms and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had like 3 kids
Yeah.
together. too.
Except for he loved her, and that's what happens when you're in love.
That's cool.
You accept him. You know. Financial. What do you expect your standard of living will be? That's a good one. What do you expect? What's going to be your standard of living? Going to be middle class, no class, high class? What are y'all going to do? I mean, can y'all have enough to eat? Is there enough money there for you to buy some meals? You got to live on beans. And it's that, what can you expect your standard of living will be? Will you have combined accounts? Well, that's a good one. A lot of times they get in a fight over that. The devil will use anything to go ahead and get a fire going in a marriage. You have combined accounts. He said under C, who will handle the money, balancing the checkbook, paying the bills, and so on. So that's important. And that needs to be done. I think it needs to be done together. It'd be the best thing to do. But sometimes it might not be his cup of tea. It might not be her cup of tea to do it all alone. So to do it together. What are you going to do about housing? That's a real good one. You know, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to get a house? You have enough money to get an apartment. You got to start your marriage off right. You know, and do you have hospitalization or insurance? That's very important. And all. Do you have life insurance? What about that? A whole life or term. So that's important for them to have that, especially if you have children, to have some life insurance. That way, if you get killed out there on the railroad or where it's at, you got to leave something. Those kids have to eat. There has to be some money there. There has to be somebody there to pay the undertaker. I mean, it costs $8,000 to $12,000 to bury someone now. $3,000 to cremate someone, and so you need to have some insurance there to take care of that. It said, does the wife plan to continue the work outside the home after marriage? That's a good one there too. Is the wife going to work outside the home? Is going to work together and all? And both of you going to work maybe until kids come or something. Look what he said here. Do you plan to continue working after you have children? And that's a good question too. Who's going to take care of the children? Are you going to stay home and take care of the children, looking at the wife? Or are you going to hire somebody to take care of your children for you? You know, so that's a good question. You know, the Bible says that the wife is to be the keeper of the home. And so if you have children, she needs to be there with them and raise them, not some other person raising their children. He said, how would you feel about asking for financial help from your family? That's a good question. How would you feel about that? Asking for financial help and all. And so sometimes it is necessary for the parents to help their kids, but it can be hard to have to ask them to. He said, do you realize that credit can be both a curse and a blessing? And so I'll suggest if they get married, that to have their bills paid off. You know, because too many times I've heard, yeah, I married her and she owed $50,000 on credit cards. And it was a problem already, you know. And so why should he marry her if she has $50,000 of the bills she piled up or he piled up? You know, it can work both ways. You got to look at them. You need to start it off right, is what he's trying to say. You realize how much pressure financial problems can place on your marriage? And all, and it is one of the worst things. In-laws and financial problems that will cause divorces. That's really bad. Not counting all the other things that goes along with it. But look under sexual. We better stop here so you can take a break and all. And we'll start here on sexual. Maybe we can take a 5-minute break here, and we'll start there. You know, that'll be on everyone's favorite subject. So the next, okay. So if you'll give you a cookie and a drink, there's ice there, and some chewy, you can really chew, and all a lot of good things there. And thank God for Brother. We are very happy to see what happened. All this food came in.
Rock of Ages, clad for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy side, a healing flood, be of sin the double cure, and save from wrath and make me pure. Could my tears forever flow, could my zeal no longer know, these for sin could not atone. Thou must save, and thou alone. In my hand no prize I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. And while I draw this fleeting breath, when my eyes shall close in death, when I rise to worlds unknown and behold thee on thy throne, Rock of Ages, left for me. Let me hide myself in thee, Rock of Ages, left for me. Rock of Ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy side, a healing flood, be of sin the double cure, could my tears forever flow? Could my zeal no longer know these for sin could not atone? Thou must save, and thou alone. In my hand no prize I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. And while I draw this fleeting breath, when my eyes shall close in death, when I rise to worlds unknown and behold thee on thy throne, Rock of Ages.
Second session.
You good?
Okay, you ready? Good to go? Okay, let me go ahead and take a minute before we start this next lecture. And all these are some good books now. If you're going to do ministry, you need some tools, just like a mechanic needs tools. This one right here is The Right Romance in Marriage by Kathy Rice. And she's the daughter of John R. Rice. And that is a very good book. So you learn something from these. All of them don't have the answer. The Act of Marriage by Tim and Beverly Hay. This is one of the best books I've ever had, and I like couples to get it and to use it and to learn it, to read that before they get married. In fact, I'll use it, buy them one and give them one. This is a new one that came out a few years back, His Needs and Her Needs. This is a tremendous book too, and all. But if you get them to read any of these books, it will help them for their marriage. And here's one that you need in marital counseling to help people with, and all. So it helps you with all the things that are going to come up. They're going to do things you never thought of that will cause problems. And there's things that problems people have in marriage you have never thought of and never will. That they're there. They happen. And then Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts is another really good book to have and all. And so these are just some good books. These are a few of them. I've bought them all through the years and read through them and study them. Because when I marry someone, I want to see it. I want it to work, so they'll be happy all their life. So I need to know everything I can about that, about marriage, and the problems they're going to have, and what to do if they do have a problem. Like if you get real sick, and you might have a pain in your ear or your head or nose or where it is, go to the doctor. You want the doctor to help you fix it, and all. And so you want him to know what to do. Right or wouldn't have went. And it's the same way with marriage counseling and taking care of their problems and all. And but here's the problem though. Usually do what the doctor wants them to do, but if the preacher tells them what to do, they usually won't do it. They're going to do it their way. Don't do that. You know, we know what it takes to get them on track. They get off the track, we can get them back on. Now, here on page 67, we're on the subject of session 2 of sexual. If you look at this on sexual, look at this, it's important. Sexual matters are a sensitive area for discussion. but absolutely necessary for the couple. God created mankind sexual beings, so we should discreetly discuss this matter. The book Intended for Pleasure by Ed Wheat, now that's an old book, but it's good, is an excellent book in these matters to loan the couple. Insist that they read this book prior to their wedding. Spiritual. God is the key to success in any marriage. Psalm 127:1. He is not just to be the honored guest in one's home, but the Lord of all. And so you have to understand that when you get married, marriage is a trinity. If you realize it, God is a trinity. God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He made us in his image. We are a trinity. We are a body, a soul, and a spirit. And a marriage should be a trinity because it's of God. It's the wife, it's the husband, and it's God. And those three, that's how marriage should be run. Now, if a couple gets married and they're lost, and they don't have God in their marriage, they might make it through marriage all their life, but they won't be happy. You know, they really won't. And so you have to have God in it to have complete happiness, the happiness that God wants us to have. God has to be in our marriage. You know, spiritual. God is the key to success in any marriage. He is not just to be the honored guest in one's home, but the Lord of all. And so God needs to be in the home. Too many people are cursing him. He's not there. Section 3. I need to say this too about a sexual relationship in marriage. It's an intimate thing, only between a husband and a wife. It's very intimate, only between the husband and wife. If they go outside, if one of them went outside of marriage, they really broke that intimacy that a couple should have, and that is never good. That is bad. So it's the thing that holds marriage together, is a sexual relationship and being faithful to each other, and holds it together. Because if one of them steps out of marriage into adultery, then that means that the wife will never trust him again, or either way, that person, they won't trust them again. And in order to make that work, they'll have to really work hard to build up the trust again, if they ever can, you know. Because some you're only going to deceive them once, they'll never trust you again.
Right.
You know. And he said here, under section 3 here, evolution of the answer given in section 2, and information to the couple on acquiring the license, scheduling, rehearsal, and ceremony, arrangement for the use of a building facilities. All these things should be done well in advance of the ceremony. And number 3, the ceremony. The marriage ceremony itself can be very elaborate, or it can be very simple. The minister can suggest various options, but that type of ceremony is a decision of the couple and their families. Now, right now, some of them are spending $50,000 on a wedding ceremony, or more. They spent that or more. And if they're not going to get married in church, if they're really at marriage hall, they're going to usually pay at least $1,500 to $2,500 to rent that thing for a couple of hours, and all. And it really runs into money what they do. But there's a way to do it, have a simple marriage, and us preachers know how to do that and how to set them up to have a marriage that won't hardly cost much. Okay, we know what to do. And also that's the reason every couple needs to have a good pastor, because usually it's foolish for a young couple to get married and to spend thousands of dollars and go try to work hard every day to pay for it. A lot of times the parents will pay for it for the lady to have that kind of marriage. But anyway, the rehearsal. Sometime during the week of the wedding, usually the evening before, the wedding party gathers for a rehearsal. It's the minister's job to take charge of the rehearsal. If the minister does not do so, an hour or more can be wasted. At the rehearsal, the minister does a talk through and a couple of walkthroughs to let everyone know what to do and where to stand. The last walkthrough should include the seating, music, professional, ceremony, and recessional. Okay? He said the ceremony, the following is offers as an example of a typical wedding ceremony. Now here's the typical wedding, the way it usually is, okay? Ushers begin seating 30 minutes before ceremony. I had a wedding here a few years back, and this young lady wanted to get married, and she had a father, and then her mother remarried, got a stepfather, and so they were both fighting who would take her down the aisle. So that she had to make the choice then. Now that's hard.
Couldn't they both take her down the aisle?
Who?
Couldn't they both take her down the aisle?
No, that's not proper. And so usually the father's supposed to take it. The blood father's supposed to take it down the aisle. That's usually what should happen. And all. So she wouldn't have been there if it wouldn't be for him. And there's a difference between a father and a daddy. But it was really a problem. I mean, man, it really was. She was devastated. You know, so finally I had to set her down and let her know what's right. You know, the right
One
thing.
daddy.
Huh?
You get one daddy.
Yeah.
Who's your daddy?
Or
Anyway.
one down the aisle.
Anyway,
Who's
it said the
your daddy,
following.
daddy?
He said the following is offers as an example of a typical wedding ceremony. Now the ushers do their part. The ushers begin seating. Notice that 30 minutes before the ceremony. Now they need you to make sure, you got to make sure they're there before time to seat those people. Okay? Because if not, they're walking around looking everywhere. They don't know what to do. So they need to be seated. You know, and I like to give them a gospel tract they can read while they're waiting. He said, grandmothers and mothers are seated as the ceremony begins. So they should be in place. Ministers and men take their places. Bridesmaids enter. So now, here come the bridesmaids marching down the aisle, if there are any. So a lot of marriages don't have any bridesmaids. But
What's the
Next
purpose
page,
of the,
page 70.
of the bridesmaid?
what's that?
What's the purpose of the bridesmaid?
Well, it's an honor thing. To go ahead and to stand up there with her. That's what it is.
Kind of like the best man.
Yeah. And so it says here, the minister can offer to help the family by meeting with them and the funeral director. It's the wrong page.
Same thing though. It applies.
Okay, page 68. Number 5, the maid of honor enters. Okay. Number 6, the ring bearer and the flower girl enter. Number 7, the bride and the father enter. Now, one thing that I do, that I like to do is, when I do counseling with them, I like to take the best man, okay, and the one who stands for her, to sit down and talk to him, and let them know that now, since you picked to be the best man and so on, you have a responsibility to this couple. And if they're having problems or something, or if they separated, you need to go see them and talk to them. And let them know that you were there when they took their vows, and they got to work their problems out. And that's what you do. That's the reason they're the best man, you know. And she picks her favorite girlfriend to stand with her.
To run off his wife.
But what it says here under 8, read Genesis 2:18, 21, 24. You have two joined those who have entered in the oldest, closest, grandest, and toughest of all human contracts, marriage. Marriage was divinely instituted in the Garden of Eden, when God spoke the words I just read. Jesus honored its celebration at the wedding in Cana. Paul chose the marriage relationship as a figure of the union God has with His church. Marriage is a worthy institution, and the Bible tells the husband to love his wife as Christ loved the church and gave Himself for it. And it tells the wife to be faithful to her husband, even as the church is obedient to Christ in everything. Now I want to stop here for a minute. We're talking about this giving away the bride. Now if you'll go back to Genesis and study it, you'll find that God put Adam in a deep sleep. Okay? And then he created woman. And the Bible says he brought her to Adam. So she was his, he was the father. He brought her to Adam. That's the reason why the real father should bring the daughter and give her away. It's biblical, it's right, and scriptural. And so that's the reason why that's done.
And
All right?
He took the rib out.
Huh?
He took the rib out.
Yeah, it sure did.
And that's the only bone in your body that grows back by itself.
Yeah. No, so he says, flesh of your flesh, flesh of my flesh. Okay, that's what it says here. Number 9, first vows. To the man, will you take this woman to be your wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Notice that word holy. Marriage it's a holy thing. It needs to stay holy. Will you love her, comfort her, honor, and keep her in sickness and in health? And forsaking all others, keep thee only unto her, so long as you both shall live. Now, this right here is a good ceremony here that he has that you can use to marry him with. Okay, so take a look at that. He said, number 10, who giveth this woman to be married to this man? So that's important to ask that question, because then the husband, the father says, my wife and I give her. That's what the way it should be. We give her. No. Second vows. Please join your right hands and repeat after me. To the man, I, Peter, take thee, Mary, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part. Now to the woman, I, Mary, take thee, Joseph, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for rich or for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part. And then it will say, I do. Ring ceremony. Then you need to look at them and say, can you say I do? And they will. Ring ceremony. The rings are an unending circle made of the purest of the material, a sign of your faith in one another. These are seals with the mutual love and memorial of this sacred service. Repeat, with this ring I thee wed, all my worldly good, and thee and I and thee and thou. Unity counsel, finalize the marriage, as you have solemnly agreed before God and these witnesses. And by the authority invested in me as the minister of the gospel, I pronounce you lawfully married, husband and wife, and what good God has joined together, that not man put asunder. Now I want to stop here for a minute when it talks about the unity candle. Now some weddings they like to have a candle, and it's a big candle and all, and it's lit. And then you have somebody come light it. Then each one takes a smaller candle, and they take it and put it together and light it at the same time. And all. So some like that in their ceremony. I've had some like that. Some don't want to. But anyway, that is some of the things they do, and different things and different examples like that they use in their marriage. It can be good, and all. And he said, introduce on number 15, introduction of the new couple as Mr. and Mrs. And then you have them take pictures. Now, pictures are very important in a marriage. Okay, and so you have them take pictures now. You want to do it on the phone. Everybody has a phone that takes pictures. And it's good too for them that you can buy a camera at Walmart and places that might have 30 or 40 pictures on it. Then you can take them, and then you can take those and have them developed into real nice for an album. So you might want to tell them that they usually cost $10 or $12 for one of those cameras. They're kind of throwaway cameras, but they're good. You get a lot of pictures on them. The reception. Okay, now we need to stop here for a minute and talk about this reception. That's also very important to have the reception. Now, if you have a lot of money, you might have a dinner at the reception, and then they'll receive gifts and things. But if you don't have a lot of money, you might have snacks at the reception and all. So you can go ahead and also make a tuna sandwich and cut it into 6 pieces, or a bologna sandwich. Everybody gets peanut butter, huh?
Someone gets the crust.
Your little
Sounds
piece,
like my type of
and
research.
have a bag of potato chips there, and all, and that way everybody get a piece. Maybe some cookies, and everybody get a cookie, and all, and you have that, and that way they can sit around, look at each other, and talk, and then open their gifts and cut the cake. The cake's not hard to make either. Mama can make the cake usually, but if you buy one, they're expensive to buy a wedding cake. But the way they make a way Mother can make a wedding cake is she cooks 5 or 6 cakes and puts them all together on a big platter, and then puts the chocolate on there, what she wants to use, and the icing. But there's a lot of ways to do that, and if you have a nice wedding, you don't have to spend a lot of money, okay? And so anyway, those are the things. He said, returning the marriage license. Now this is good. It is the minister's responsibility to sign and return the marriage license to the proper authorities. Since the minister is the one officiating, he's the one required to take care of this immediately. And so what we do is we fill it out, we have them sign it, and we have to fill it out then and turn it in to the county recorder, and it's recorded then at the courthouse. Okay, we'll take a look at funerals on the next page.
So
6.
we
We
just
know what to
did.
do now when the couple gets married, okay? And he didn't mention it, but it's usually good in there to have somebody do a song, a marriage song, okay? And all, so there's several good marriage songs. If you know somebody who can sing and maybe play a piano and sing
Down by the river.
and all. Then he didn't mention the wedding march. You need to have someone play the piano and have the wedding march, okay? 2 solos, some things. If you can't play the piano and do the wedding march, you can buy a CD and play it. And it's nice for to have the wedding march. Those are some little extra things that you know about. Directing the work of the ministry. Funerals. There is no pastoral ministry that offers the open door of spiritual opportunity as does the presence of death in the home. Death is so universal. His vigil is so stark and grim. His presence is so dark and dreaded. In his wake are oceans of heartaches and rivers of tears. This is the hour when the loving and caring pastor is needed most. Here, let him be at his best, both spiritually and scripturally. And then Dr. Criswell has a book on that too, by the way. You can get that from Broadman Press. The funeral service is the very important part of a pastor's ministry. And it is. It's really important. You got to know that. But they're hurting when someone dies. They need a preacher there.
How do you speak on a funeral if someone they're not saved or something? How do you speak on something like that?
Yeah.
You tell a lot of lies.
Well,
That's what happens at funerals.
you have to take it as it goes, is what it amounts to.
Yeah.
Okay? He said here, it's an important part of the ministry. If you count it a light thing to be endured, then you have the wrong approach. God opens to you a door of opportunity to be a blessing to a family that only the funeral can this be experienced to open hearts that only a funeral will do. And so it's important. My mother got saved at my stepfather's funeral. My father died when we were young. She remarried. I got saved, and I prayed for her for 30 years. She got saved at his funeral. It was right after the funeral, but it took that to get her open her eyes and see the importance of getting saved.
They should make tracks.
A lot of people get
Funeral
saved at funerals.
paper.
Yeah.
They should put them in the funeral thing.
Anyway, so looking at it now instead of the family, the minister should meet with the family as soon as he learns of the death to offer whatever help is needed. Okay? The death of a loved one will cause many emotional responses of which the minister should be aware. Shock and crying. A lot of crying. Guilt. Why didn't I do more? Denial and isolation. That's another problem. Sense of loss. So they said, what are we going to do? What am I going to do? How am I going to make it? How can I live with my child being buried? So on. Anger. A lot of them are angry. They're mad because that person died. The anger is at God. They blame God for it. They're mad at God because their brother died, or what it was. They're mad at God. It's God's fault. That's what they always do. But even though the guy who buried him, and he drank and smoked all his life and died of cancer, but it's God's fault. Yeah, that's what they do. Then, of course, bargaining. That's another thing that goes along. Depression. They're very depressed. They want to make a bargain with God, It don't work. Acceptance. So they need to accept the fact that that person is gone, that God knows what he's doing, and God allowed it to happen. And so now the important thing is eternity. They need to be thinking about eternity. And they need to be thinking one day they will die too. And they have to go to the right place. And so that's where a pastor can come in and really go ahead and make sure that they know that all the survivors know that you got to look at eternity. He said there are at least 3 things a bereaved person needs. Number 1, they need a safe place, familiar surroundings. That's important. Number 2, that's where they need to have a church home where they go to. If one of the kids are killed or the husband or wife dies, it's a place that's a familiar surrounding. And there's loving church members there too who will help them and all. That's important. They need safe people, friends, relatives, and a minister. They need that. They need something to lean on. They need safe situations with worthwhile roles to perform. So that's another thing they need. The situation. The minister can assist the family in some very practical ways, helping the family determine the funeral home they want to use. So that's another thing. We know where the crooked funeral homes are and where some that are honest. We know after you do it a while you learn. Okay? So we can help them with that. Informing the family of the things the funeral director may need. Okay? And so that's an important thing too. The third thing, the day and time of the service is usually set in cooperation with the schedules of the funeral director and the minister. That's another thing. You get with him, and you all set up a time. And you got to understand that maybe that person that's going to die, that you're going to bury, has maybe, looking at it, he has a brother that lives over in New York. And so you got to give him time to get there. Think of that. So you got to talk. So the funeral directors want to bury him in 3 or 4 days. Sometimes it takes longer to get him there. So you might schedule it a week later. So those are some things you have to look at and to go ahead and help the family of the one who died. Who will preach and assist in the service? Who will sing and what songs? That's another thing. We have to meet with them and see what was their favorite song. Now here's a problem. Sometimes they want to go ahead and have at the funeral, they want to play their favorite song. And so I said, what is it? And they, some kind of a rap song. I said, no, we won't have that in the church at all. But you can play it after the funeral if you want to, which would be good. Now to give everybody something to listen to. But you do not let that in the church. Okay? You do not do it. Now sometimes we have to bury them at the funeral home. Well, if they want to play it, I do everything to keep them from playing that racket. And that's what it is, racket. And so we have to go ahead and try to go ahead and keep it spiritual. That's the thing, because God's working on hearts. And some guy get up there and sing a rap song about, running over the deer and killing it and spitting on somebody. You know how they do that in them rap songs. You got to go ahead and you got to keep that thing as spiritually as you possibly can. That's what you have to do. And I had a funeral one time, this woman came and got saved. She was a Mormon. She came and got saved, but she never was saved before, but somehow the Mormon church didn't tell her how to be saved. But we always tell everybody how to be saved, and she got saved. And then she had a husband, and he lagged behind. He didn't want to go to church. He didn't want to get saved, but she finally got him there, and he got saved. And so sure enough, I mean, it's wonderful. But the thing is, the LDS church never showed him either how to get saved. Seemed like that's all they wanted was their money. But yeah, he got saved. They came to church a couple of weeks. He had a heart attack and died. Yeah. And now he was not just an average man. He was a famous man. He was one of the directors up there at the mine. He's very famous. Everybody knew him. That worked at that big mine up there on the hill, copper mine, and all. And so anyway, he got saved, and his wife came, so we want to get the funeral together, and all. And I said, okay. I said, we'll arrange it. So we arranged it, and so they decided to have the funeral here in Salt Lake at the funeral home, so that the church wouldn't have held everybody. And so they got a big place, and we had the funeral there, and there all these people came in, all his relatives and everybody. They came into his funeral, and there wasn't a Mormon bishop up there. There was a Baptist preacher. And so it seems like funny, but they were in shock, you know, because they didn't know he got saved. He'd been saved a short time, a few weeks, and all. And so, you know, this man, he raced chariots. He was the number 3 chariot racer in the world. He was famous. And so anyway, I got up there and did the funeral and told them all how he got saved. That really worked good, because then they heard how he got saved and why he went to heaven and all, and made sure they got the Roman road and gave him an invitation. And I always give an invitation at the funeral and all, but here's the way you have to do it. You have to ask everybody to bow their head, and I'll say, I'm going to lead you in the sinner's prayer. If you pray this and mean it, the Lord will save you, and you can go and be with Billy. And so some of them will really pray. God got a hold of them, you know. And then while they still have their head bowed, I say, now raise your hand if you prayed that and meant it. And they'll raise their hand. You got to count real fast. So maybe 20 did. You can tell the wife, you know, 20 people got saved because he died. They raised their hand. But that wasn't all with him. He was raised over there in another town out here, out of Utah. And so it took an hour and 30 minutes to get there, to Tabiona. And so now I rode with him, and the funeral director, so that gave me an hour and a half to witness to him. The guy drove the hearse. And so, man, he got a load. And so we finally got there. And so all the people who lived there, they were just going to go to the grave site, because that's too far to drive to Salt Lake for the funeral, even though he worked here for 30 years. So the whole town was there. The whole town. Everybody in the country were there at the grave site. So we drove up and unloaded the body and everything, and ready for the graveside services. That gave me a chance to preach another sermon, a funeral sermon, to tell how he got saved and everything, and all. And so we did the same thing, and we went through it, same sermon. And I gave a little bit on the resurrection, of course, because people wonder about that. And a lot of them raised their hand. And so that's one way I got the gospel to Tabiona. Yeah, think of that. God uses funerals. And so, anyway, I had a guy with me who could sing. And all this guy could play the guitar and sing. He was good. And so I had him singing, and I preached, and I had him sing again as we closed the funeral. And some of those his family invited him out over their house to eat with them after the funeral. And all, they were impressed. So I rode back with the hearse, of course. So I got another hour and a half with the driver.
Kind of like preaching in prison. You got a captive audience.
Yeah, there you go. So anyway, there was I'm sure he never forgot that funeral. But we have to take advantage of the opportunity, you see. That's what we have to do. You know. And so anyway, So you never know what's going to happen at a funeral. Strange things happen at funerals, you know. One time I was burying a guy, and he's young, and he killed himself playing with a gun. He's playing Russian roulette. I don't know if you've ever done that before. Don't do it. It's going to get you. You have a 1 in 6 chances of killing yourself. And he had done it for a long time and never killed himself. But that day, it went off. And he only been saved a short time, probably a month or two. And at the funeral, at the grave, his wife, he said, lifted him up. And she looked at me and said, Preacher, can't you make him live again? And I said, no, honey, put him back down. You know, but strange things happen at funerals, you know. So we buried him. And that's right. They do things like that. In fact, you raise them up from the dead.
You ever seen a fight at a funeral?
Huh?
You ever seen them fight at a funeral?
Fight? Not yet. Have you?
I actually have.
Huh?
I actually seen two brothers go at it at a funeral.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen that yet, but I will, I'm sure. I buried enough people that have buried in 2 cemeteries through the years. And you will too, when you work with people. He said here, and also, and then he said, the last thing on page 69, were there any favorite passages of the deceased or family? And so you always take the great Bible passages and show them where they went and what happened to them and all. I always knew that when they died, when a person dies, things happen to them. I always knew that. I've been with them when they've died. And so I had an old preacher at once who wanted to come here and live out his life, and his wife had died. He was very old, and he also wanted to come down to Utah and do ministry. So I brought him in as an assistant here and help assist in the church. One day he told me, he said, I'm going to tell you something I learned from the funeral director. He said, I said, yeah, what is it? And he said, I pastored in Sacramento for almost 40 years. He said, we was in the suburbs. If anybody died in the church, that they also used that same funeral home. And he said one day one of the elderly ladies died, and he went ahead after the funeral. The funeral director said this. He said, now you make sure and bring me everybody that dies from your church. And the pastor was thinking, boy, he's greedy. And then the funeral director realized that he said, no, he says, because he said, I want to, because your people are so easy to work on. And the pastor said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, when I get your people, they're real, I lift their arm and everything and their legs. They're just agile, and they said they're so easy to work on. And the funeral director was saved. He said, but when I get a lost person in, he said, their arms are stiff and their legs are stiff, he said. He said, they die that way. He said, sometimes I have to put my foot here and try to straighten out their arm or their leg. And he said that if they die in a fetal position, it's hard to straighten them out because we got to lay them in the coffin, he said. So the difference is when you're saved, if you're saved and you die, you're saved, you're ready to go to heaven. And just pass over to heaven.
You're not in fear.
But a lost person, when they die, the demons come for them. And believe me that. And the devil comes to get them. And they see him coming to get them and take them to hell. They see it. See, there's a space between life and death. It's 4 minutes. If your heart stops beating, you have 4 minutes. You're still alive for 4 minutes. And during that space, the devil is there, and is there to take them to hell. Some cry out that they smell fire. They feel fire. Some say they smell sulfur. You know. Some say, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And they're fighting to stay alive, to not go. And then they die, they're all stiff like that. That's how they die. So I can look at anybody and tell them how they're going to die. They're going to die happy and relaxed, knowing they're going to heaven, the Lord's going to come for them. Or you're going to fight trying to stay alive, and you're going to die all stiff and everything. And you're going to make a lot of problems for the poor undertaker to try to straighten you out and put you into a coffin. You know, that's what I tell them. They need to know. They need to know that death is nothing to laugh about. Nothing that it's horrible to a lost person. To a certain person, we're all happy. We know. One of my friends died and he was an older man, and his grandson was with him when he died. They were both preachers, and the old pastor was 88. He said, "Look, Fountain." He said, "You see, the angels are coming for me." He said, "It's like I always preached." That's the last thing he said. But he saw them coming, you know. And so one day I was at a store, and I stopped at a used store up in Colorado, and we went to visit my son's family, his wife's family, and so I didn't want to sit there all day and look at each other, so I thought I'd get the car and see what I can do. And so I stopped at a used store, and maybe they have something there I can use. And I went in there and was looking around, and the lady looked awful sad. One person running it, a small used store. It was a Methodist used store. So I looked, I said, "You sure look so sad." You know, ministers recognize that, by the way. "You look so sad." She said, "I am." She said, "My husband just died 2 months ago." I looked at her and I said, "Well," I said, "was he born again?" And she said, "He sure was." And I said, "Are you born again?" She said, "Yeah, I am too." She said, "We went to the Baptist church in Nebraska." And I said, "Well, he's in heaven." She said, "Well, I know that." And she said, "In fact, this is what happened when he died." She said he had a heart attack, and it was a congestive heart failure. And the doctor told me that I had to get all the kids there because he wouldn't live long, a day or two. So she said, "I called all the kids to get them there so they could be with him and see him before he died." And she said, "My youngest boy was there, and he flatlined." You know what that means? Your heart stops. And so a bell goes off, and here come the nurses and the doctors running. And she said, I backed over towards the wall when he died so they could get in and work on him, and my boy was on the other side. And she said they couldn't get him breathing again, his heart beating. And she said, "My son saw him when he died, his soul leave his body, and it came over and kissed me on the forehead." Yeah, that's what her son saw, and all on his way to heaven. And so there's things like that happen when they die. I've heard a lot of stories like that. That they see it. They see their soul leave the body. I've had someone tell me that their soul left the body, and they were hanging over their body, and the doctors got them breathing again, and they went back into their body. But there's a lot of things happen when a person dies. But
I don't remember nothing.
But you need to make it plain to them that we know how they're going to die.
So what was she saying?
A lot of times that'll get people saved if they know how they're going to die. You know, they're going to die all stiff and everything, and see the devil coming to get them, and on and on. And you tell a person gets killed in a car wreck, same thing. They dying, you know, and all. And another thing you need to know is when a person goes into a coma, and you'll think that they're in a coma, they don't know nothing, but they still hear. They can hear you talk and everything, and they can hear you. And I've led people to the Lord in a coma before. And the way I do it is I'll take them by the hand, and I'll say, "I'm here, and I'm a pastor," and a lot of times they know me. And I'll say, "Now what I want to do is I want to help you make sure you get to heaven." I say, "Can you hear me? If you'd squeeze my hand," and usually they barely squeeze it. And I know they're listening. Then I go through the plan of salvation, and I lead them into prayer. I say, "Now I know you can't speak, but you just pray this in your mind and heart, and the Lord will save you." Then after the prayer, I'll ask them, I'll say, "Now, if you prayed that minute, would you squeeze my hand?" And you can feel them squeeze it. So you need to know you can win people in a coma. You know, you need to know that. And they lay there, they hear everything that's going on too. They hear it, they know what's going on.
Why was the girl sad?
Yeah.
Now, why was the girl sad
Yeah.
that her husband died?
So anyway, what was some things? I didn't get the question. So what
Why
was it?
was the lady sad when her husband died?
I'm glad you asked that. She missed him. She just missed him,
Yeah.
That's natural. Just to still miss them. I mean, they're part of you. And they've been married a long time. And we're farmers and married a long, long time. And that's part of you when that mate dies, That's a horrible thing. All of a sudden, they're not there, And I found that even myself, I've been married now for 51 years, and sometimes if my wife isn't there, maybe she spent a night with her kids or something, I'll reach over there and she ain't there, And I'm sure maybe you've gone through that before, sister. You reach over and he's not there, and all. And but it become part of you, okay, So that's it. And then they're not there. You got to understand, when you're married, you become one, but now you're just a half again. Yeah, God said you're one. And also, anyway, time is running out here. He said the funeral home and all. And so here's the order. Here it says the funeral home and all. Tells you how to get it set up. The order of the services as followed are there on page 70. So that order of the services. Now here's lessons. Here's some sermons here you can use if you're going to give the funeral. And the following are a few appropriate funeral messages, okay? And then look over on page 71, they're outlined. Revelation 14:13. And then here's the outline. Then John 11 is another outline. There's John 14. Here's another outline, okay? That you can bring out at that funeral. Like, look at John 14 for a minute. For instance, it's peace, and it's a place. Special, spacious, and spotless. That's heaven. And there's a promise if you go there. Personal, powerful, and precious. The pathway, the way. It said in John chapter 14, verse 8, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto me but by the Father. So see that. You see the way, how men are saved. The truth, how men are sure. The life, how men are satisfied. And so, you see, you can go ahead and use that. See, there's laid out. It's at the graveside service. Upon arrival at the grave, the minister should go at once to the rear of the funeral coach to await the removal of the body. So what we do is we go right instead at the hearse, and then we wait for the pallbearers to come, and some of them will come a little early. While we're waiting, it's usually good to give them a verse or two from the Bible, because you want to make that time count. Now they all get there, and then you lead the casket to the grave. Okay, so that's what you're supposed to do. All right, that's the graveside service. You also want to use, like, he has verses there: 1 Thessalonians 4:13, John 14, and so on. And those are verses on death and burial and resurrection. So one of the things you need to know is that when they bury somebody, they bury them with their head facing west, but they're looking east, because the Lord's going to come back from the east to resurrect them. So that's why they all bury them that way. And so maybe you notice that at a funeral they're all buried the same way. If their head, they lay them flat like this, but their face here is looking east. And that's the reason why. Because the Lord's going to come back and resurrect us. He's coming from the east. Okay? And then number 7, the follow-up visit a few days after the funeral. The days and weeks following the loss of a loved one are long and lonely. A brief visit by the minister will be a blessing. The minister will also want to encourage those of his church to support these people in their hour of loss. So that's also important for the members to call them and contact them and stop by and bring them a cake or a box of Kentucky Fried Chicken or something. That's a good thing to do.
Chicken?
Anything like that. That's showing them that you care. Okay? And that's important. And that's those things that you will do in funerals and weddings that we looked at tonight. So now, next week we're going to look at counseling, which is very important, okay? And, so that'll be on page 73. 73. And all, and so we'll dismiss them, and Robert, would you dismiss us in prayer?
Thank you, Lord, for letting us gather here tonight. Thank you for getting us here safely and back home safely. And thank you for opening our hearts to learn what we need to do in weddings and in funerals. And thank you, Lord, for showing us how to do it, and for the teachers that are teaching us, and for everybody that ain't here to get here. Let you say in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, well, blessed to be with you tonight.
Thank you, Pastor.
And all, we love you well, and all, and make sure you get